Welcome back to Between State Lines, episode 47. And as our weekly update here, yes, the world is still on fire, and yes, we are still exhausted. Um, if you recall, a few months ago, we did an episode on cults and some of the wildest ones to ever exist. And there were some weird ones and ones that still exist, oddly, to this day. But after we released that episode, we reached out to our TikTok community, asked if anyone had experiences with cults or uh, cult similar churches. And Chloe DM'd me, and she is an ex-Mormon, or ex-Mo, as I feel like they're called.
Yeah.
Um, she wants to divulge all the secrets as much as she can to us. So welcome in. But before we get to the meat of the episode, we like to put all of our guests through the ringer, um, and ask you some really hard questions. I have two today, and your answers will determine how we treat you for the rest of the night. Uh,
I love it.
so the first one is, let's say Mark Zuckerberg walks up to you and he has a briefcase full of $2 million. He tells you the money is yours, tax free. In this scenario, he's a generous billionaire who pays your tax bill for you. Uh, so not grounded in reality at all. But you have to do one thing. You have to survive in an elementary school containing a panther, a grizzly bear, rattlesnakes, some cougars, and a tiger. There are some parameters to this challenge. One, elementary school has one floor and roughly 15 classrooms. 14 of those classrooms contain one or more of the animals I previously listed, and one room is completely empty. All doors are closed when you arrive. The building is completely dark, no lights in except for you get some streaks of sunlight allowed in through the windows, but no outdoor lights, like no flashlight. And you have a hunting knife on you as your only weapon. The animals are very hungry, and you must survive 24 hours. Would you do it?
So there's one classroom that has nothing in it.
Yep.
Aside from the fact that I have no intention of ever being anywhere close enough to Mark Zuckerberg to have that conversation. Other than that, yeah, I do it for sure.
Hell yes.
Yeah, I'm in.
That is my level of awesome. Like, I would do it. I'm sure staff would be like, "No, I'm not doing it at all."
What animals were in there?
A grizzly bear, panther, rattlesnakes, cougars, and a tiger.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't do that.
Yeah, you have too much to live for. Except
I
for us,
guess.
we
I,
just have.
I have no intention of dying. I plan on living through it.
You said everything was really hungry.
Yeah, they're all. But if you open the right classroom door, you're fine. Just make sure you choose the right door. Second question I have is, a truck containing $800,000 in dimes crashes on the road in front of you, spilling all the money everywhere. Assuming you would get away scot free, and you have, like, I don't know, 20 minutes to do this, how much do you think you could grab before leaving?
800,000 in dimes, and I have 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm trying to think. So 10 dimes is $1, 800,000. You know what? I don't think so. I don't think you can pick up enough money in 20 minutes. I don't think it's worth it. Trade-offs.
My favorite on that question is that somebody was weighing out the dimes. I think they said $5,000 worth of dimes was like 250 pounds.
Yeah, even just picking up the dimes itself. No, I'd be better off to go spend 20 minutes doing something else. I could make more.
Yeah.
You know, that is fair. We'll let you have a pass on that one since Steph
Okay.
agrees with you.
All right.
That's what it takes.
That's what.
Perfect.
So into the meat of our episode here. So my wife is ex-Mormon. Her whole family is in some variation Mormon or ex-Mormon. So I have very limited knowledge of what goes on in the church and what goes on in day-to-day life. I have heard stories, nothing confirmed. I've heard weird things like, I don't know if you can confirm this, but like soaking is a thing that apparently is out
It,
there.
it's before my time, but yes, I'm aware of it. Yes, I've heard of it happening. I still know people who know people at like BYU. It gets talked about, but it was not a thing that I was aware of when I was kind of in more of an age that I think folks do that. Folks, the kids. Um, and I was such a good Mormon that that wouldn't have even been on my radar.
Okay, my wife has denied it, like it ever existing. I'm like, I don't know. I've seen a lot of TikTok videos. I feel like there's some truth to it somewhere down the
I
line.
feel like there's all kinds of creative ways to get around things when it comes to anything sexual. So I've heard enough that I'm like, it's got to be coming from somewhere. There was also like a crabs outbreak in armpits at BYU not too long ago. So
Oh,
like, I believe it.
Jesus. So this is my first question, and it's gonna like give you the floor here. So for
Yeah.
our listeners who have no idea what the heck Mormons are or who they are or what the LDS Church is, what is the LDS Church, and kind of give us your story, really.
Okay. So I'm just from the what is Mormonism perspective, right? It was founded in the 1800s by Joseph Smith. It's a Christian religion, but the foundation of it was like Joseph Smith claimed to receive revelations from God and also an ancient text to translate, which the stories I was told when I was younger was that there were these gold plates that he literally translated, right? And as I've gotten older and the story goes, it's more like there was a rock and a hat that he looked into, and that was what he translated as the Book of Mormon, right? But the whole religion is based on him being a prophet, receiving this revelation from God that none of the churches currently on the earth were God's church, Christ's church. It's a Christian religion, although there's plenty of Christian sects that would maybe argue with that a little bit because the Book of Mormon is an addition to the Bible, and right in Revelations it says nothing shall be added to this. And then the other big premise of Mormonism is that there's still a prophet on the earth who receives revelation directly from God, and that the church is run like Christ ran the church, which wasn't actually a church, right? Anyway, but it's run in the same way, and there's a prophet and 12 apostles and the whole spiel. So that's kind of the like origins of it, and then there's the moral code of it. So the things that people often know about Mormons, right, is like you don't drink coffee. Once upon a time it was caffeine, now it's just coffee. Don't drink alcohol, no sex outside of marriage, like kind of the basics there, but very much like a high demand kind of puritanical Christian religion.
Okay. And so is it just like essentially the additional book or books that make it different than other sects like Methodists and Presbyterians?
The additional books, because there's also another one that has over time, it was not an ancient text, but was like written by the prophets through Revelation. So there's two more books. That one's called the Doctrine and Covenants. And that there's this belief that the power of God, like the priesthood, only exists in the Mormon church, and that the Mormon prophet is ordained by God to lead the church. So when you talk to really deeply zealous Mormons, it's everyone really should be Mormon, will eventually be Mormon. The only way you can be saved is through the Mormon ordinances. And I'm saying Mormon, and I'm sure if someone hears this, they'd be like, it's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because it's become this whole big thing. But those are the main ones. And then it's a religion that evangelizes, right? So there's missionaries that go and proselyte to bring more people into it. But I think that's really kind of what captures it. And then the temple, and there's ordinances that you do in the temple, and lots of religions have different ordinances, and ceremonies that people go through, like in Catholicism, you have your first communion, right? Similar type things. Um, but one of the things that does make it a little strange is the belief that, like, because everyone on the earth needs to have gone through these ordinances, you do this work for people who are dead also. So if someone's died and they've never been baptized, you would do baptism by proxy for them and all the other like things that happen in a Mormon temple.
So, so my wife has like once upon a time told me about the whole baptisms for the dead.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, it seems weird to me to do that. Obviously, if someone's not Mormon, they're not, whatever. But like, what does that involve? Like, what does that entail doing if you're the one doing the baptism and like you're the one? I guess you're holding a card or something as the proxy or whatever.
Yeah. So basically, baptisms for the dead or baptisms by proxy happen in the temple, and you have to have an interview to even be able to go into the temple and be found worthy. And it's 12 and older. Maybe it's now dropped to like 11 because things are changing regularly enough, even though it's never changing. They are changing. But you go in, you get dressed in white, you have a card with a name on it, and it could be like someone has done all this genealogical research for their family. So it could be like a family name, or it could just be a name from archives that people have dug up, not literally, but you have a card with the name on it, and then the priesthood holder who can baptize, right, has the priesthood authority to baptize someone. You basically go into the water and get baptized, but instead of them saying your name, they say your name for and in behalf of, and then the name of the person who is dead. It's so weird talking through this because I'm like, oh, all of this stuff, like the words are ingrained in my brain, right? Like just part of the deal. So, and then you go through the process of getting baptized, and that's it.
How many? So if you're the proxy, how many people in a session do you like proxy for?
Oh, I'm trying to remember. If you're doing it for your family, it could be like a whole stack of names, anywhere between, like 5 to probably 15 or so. When I was, so there's different roles and responsibilities in the church, and I was in charge of the youth, like the young women. Um, and so I would go regularly because they do this as like a youth activity. And I was sitting there. I wasn't, going to be baptized myself. But I would guess they probably all did about 5 names each, something like that.
Yeah, I thought when I first heard of the whole baptisms for the dead, I thought it was literally in my naive brain they were digging up people's. I was like, that's so weird. Like, why is that legal?
Yeah, and I think they've tried to like shift to baptism by proxy, right? Rather than for the dead for that reason. But that may just be something that I've heard like conversationally. I've now been out 10 years or so. I mean, I still have family members who are active. But when I first left, I was very connected to all the news because you go through this whole grieving process of sorts. At least I did, where I was really angry for a while. Just processing everything. But some things have changed, and I'm not always up to date on the latest.
Yeah, that is insane. When I heard about that, I was like, oh man, that's really one of the strangest things. But didn't they get in trouble with I think they were doing it for the Holocaust victims too.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yep.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Just like no. And because of that, they've changed some of the rules around it where and I can't remember exactly what they are, so I don't want to misquote it, but something like they have to be an immediate, like in your family, it has to be a family member, or the person has to have been gone like 100 years, or like they've changed some things there. And it's a funny thing because if you don't believe in it, there's part of me that's like, yeah, who really cares? But at the same time, it's pretty disrespectful,
just a tad. So, you had mentioned that you left the church about 10 years ago. So, what
Yeah.
made you leave the church? Like, I grew up really hardcore Methodist and Presbyterian, and
Yeah.
was a pretty big a hole. And I left because my brother. Part of it was my brother came out as gay, and that
Yeah.
was like a huge thing for me.
Yeah.
Was there like an eye opening moment for you when you left, or was it like kind of like a bunch of things happened?
Yes, and so a bunch of things happened, and there was like the moment, or a moment, I should say. A lot of it was I was an expat, so I didn't get married young, like you're supposed to do, which people be like, you're not supposed to. I'm like, yes, you are. Like you're told to get married and reproduce and do all the things, which I was in, and I really wanted to. It just didn't happen. Like I didn't get married young. So I ended up going back to grad school, and through the course of, business school and then career, ended up in Japan as an expat. Um, at like 30, in my early 30s, mid 30s. And over there, I got put in charge of the youth group. And it was just a number of things. Like I dealt with a lot of things that I kind of just figured out how to deal with, like not fitting in exactly because I wasn't married, didn't have kids, etc. But something about being an expat where I, like the first Sunday I went to church, the question I got was like, well, so what does your husband do? Like, what brought you here? And I was like, is this an explicit podcast? Or do you try and keep it clean?
No, we go whatever you want to
Okay,
say.
perfect. And while I didn't say this out loud, because I was very, very, I was still very Mormon, I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, I'm the one that's here for my career. And I actually had like this older woman, and lovely and indoctrinated and all those things. But she asked me what my husband did. And I was like, I don't know. I haven't found him yet. So if you find him, you let me know what he does. Cause I'd love to know. Like I just was, being sassy. So that was part of it. But then I was put in charge of the youth group and these girls. And like I was teaching things. And in my brain, I was like, oh, I have really done some mental gymnastics to be okay with this stuff. And I'm having a really hard time teaching this to these girls. Like the patriarchy was just the rage I felt about it. So that kind of started, I think also even all the way back, probably into my 20s or even before that, like my concept of God was just different than what Mormon God was. And so I think that actually kept me in longer because I didn't question as much, because I was like, oh, well, this is what they say, but here's how I feel about it. And it's fine. And I'm going to follow the rules. And then my nephew came out as gay. And that was kind of like, I think I was done at that point, just where I think maybe I was stuck in it like another year just going, because it also was my whole community. Like I was overseas. It was my whole community. I moved from Japan to Hong Kong, and again, like whole community. So that my nephew coming out, and then also I was approaching 40. And I mean, I like not that close, but close enough where I was like, I was super Mormon, and I was like, I will not be a 40-year-old virgin. I'm not doing that. Like I just finally was like, and no one can tell me what I'm going to do with my body, and I don't have to answer to anyone about what I do with my body. And so it just turned into this whole thing where I was done. I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm done with all of this. Like, and then as I was going through that process, also doing more research, like I'd always had issues with polygamy, which people will say the Mormon church doesn't practice polygamy. And that is true in terms of like, you don't have people married to two people, at least not in mainstream Mormonism. But like my dad is sealed, which is Mormon marriage, right? Like to 3 women. And that's an okay thing. Women can't be sealed to multiple men, but men can be sealed to multiple women. So polygamy is still very much a practice from a eternal perspective. So all of those things, they just kept adding up. And I was like, okay, peace out. I'm good.
So I have one question. I forgot the other one. I'll get back to that one. But about you're married now, right? You have a husband.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So me being a not ex-Mormon, just nothing to do with the church at all.
Never Mormon. Yeah.
I try to not grill my wife and her family about their experiences, but how much is your husband? Was he a Mormon before, or is he ex not Mormon at all?
Never Mormon, ex Jehovah's Witness.
Oh
So
wow, okay. Oh, maybe
he
we need a
left.
podcast.
It was a hot minute, and like he was done when he was a teenager, so not. But like his mom's still Jehovah's Witness. So it, yeah, so not ex Mormon, but at the time that we met, I was part of a podcast about like life after Mormonism, and it wasn't so much about the church itself, but more around like you are 40 and you don't know how to make friends because you've never had to, because the Mormon church provides all that, or you have never actually had any conversations about, I don't know, like sex with your spouse, really, because it's, like just different things. So I was part of that, and he would listen and then would ask me some questions. But also just being part of my family, right? Like we go to things, my immediate family. I have two siblings who are still Mormon, and then myself and two others who aren't. Um, and not super like, we're going to have prayers at every meal, which is a lot, but my extended family is still very Mormon. And so he's just kind of learned little bits here and there. So he's pretty familiar. I have a nephew who's on a mission right now, and they live close to us. So like he's pretty familiar with things at this point.
Okay,
But he'll do the same thing where he'll see something on like TikTok or Instagram, and he's like soaking. He's like, is that real? Like whatever it is. I'm like, yeah, this thing is real. I know it sounds crazy, and it's true.
I remember when my father-in-law was staying with us for a little bit when my daughter was born, and one of my brother-in-laws had just recently left the church, and my mother-in-law had been over there and didn't know the whole story yet that they left. But she was like, told my father-in-law that all their underwear was like not the approved underwear,
Garment.
whatever. Yeah, the garments, and like how that was so dramatic. And I knew they were leaving the church. My father-in-law did not know that at the time, and I was like, oh man, I'm so privileged here. but so when you left the church and you said you
Yeah.
had family still in the church, how was that dynamic? How do you balance that, like family still in the church and you being out of the church?
My family was never super like my mom died when I was 18, and my dad has just never been like the super um not like, he's not super spiritual. He likes the rules. He's like 84. He, likes patriarchy. It works for him. So it more for him, like I've always challenged him in different ways. So more for him, it's just like, okay, whatever. I will say that like some things I just kept to myself and was more quiet about. So like I wouldn't drink in front of my family. I still don't really drink in front of my family a ton. But like being married to a never Mormon has made things easier, because it's like we have alcohol in the house, and the people who want to just believe that I don't drink for whatever reason can do that. They can just go, oh, that's got to be Adams, right? Like, and that's fine. But I like, it just was a little bit of a slow exit from their perspective. I'd also been living overseas for like 4.5 years. My family's biggest thing, at least my siblings, is more around just integrity. Like whatever you do, just be honest about it and live your life honestly, right? And so if it means leaving Mormonism, okay, well then just don't pretend that like you haven't left. So it has not been especially difficult, which is really nice, because I've got like my sister-in-law's family has a text group, and they've left, and like so much of it is about church and what was said at like the big conference that happens twice a year, and it's just very like that. Whereas my family is sending totally inappropriate memes, Mormon or not Mormon, right? Like it's not who we are. So it's been much easier than it is for a lot of people.
Do you we've had this here where we had missionaries come frequently, and I'm pretty sure my wife has like had her records removed from the church,
Yeah.
but her uncle is one of the like higher up people. I don't know what, he's pretty high in the church. I'm sure that's probably why we could get them in there. But do you get missionaries at your house a lot trying to get you back, or
No, I had them one time at this house, and like part of the thing with the church is if you don't remove your name from the records, which I haven't yet, in part just because of my dad, it just feels like it's not super important to me. At whatever point after he passes away, I probably will, because I just would like to be done. Um, but they've come like one time and I was nice. It also happens that so here's some Mormon lingo, like in the ward, which would be my congregation that I'm supposed to go to where I live right now. One of the women was a missionary. I went on a mission. So one of the women was a missionary in my mission when I was on my mission. And actually I knew her name. So I'll get like a birthday card. And I reached out and was like, look, I'm not removing my name from the records, but I do not want to be contacted. I don't want people to reach out to me. It just so happened recently we split our time between Arizona and Washington, and we were in Arizona, and missionaries just happened to knock on the door. No idea, like they didn't know I had been a member. They didn't know anything about it. And I was super nice because also part of going on a mission is you get this whole persecution complex where like people are mean to us and it just shows that we have the truth. And I'm like, nope, I'm going to be super nice. And also was honest. I'm like, yeah, I'm ex-Mormon. I went on a mission, not interested at all, but can I get you guys a glass of water? Right. Like I know it's hot outside, whatever. So, but otherwise I haven't really had people chase me down, which has been nice. I'm sure they call my dad and wonder, which this is another thing. You're always connected to your parents, right? It's all part of the deal. If they need my address, to be like, can you update her address so we know where she is? So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure my mother-in-law is the one doing that.
It's made the other thing that is interesting. I went to BYU for both undergrad and grad school. And it's interesting because I left the church after that. And it sometimes gets a little tenuous because like I still really enjoy a lot of my classmates, but also I'm no longer Mormon. I have freshman year roommates from college. We now have this text thread. It is clear I'm the only one that's ever left. Most of them live in like Utah and Idaho. And it's just like they're all talking about church stuff they're doing. And I'm like, okay, great. So I just don't say anything. It's fine.
So what would you? I feel like being an atheist, I always want to troll any kind of people that come to the house talking religion. I have since learned that obviously that's not the best thing to do. I feel like Mormons, they're always so young and naive. And
Yeah.
So what would you suggest if they come to people's houses? Like, what's a nice thing to do for them?
As far as just nice, honestly, is to offer them a chance to come in and like something to drink and just like it is exhausting. Just you're out every day. You get one day partially off a week, like not even a whole day off. So it's 7 days a week. So that would be it. And then just demonstrate kindness. Like that's the best thing. Cause I think a lot of people, and I think some of my extended family has a hard time reconciling things because I'm for sure happier than I've ever been outside of the church. Right. And they, in some ways they're like, yeah, cause your husband and he's great. And he came along kind of the same time that I was leaving or from their perspective. But I also just think living a great life where you're kind and generous is kind of the best thing you can do, right? To be like, yeah, it's not the fear of God that is making me be nice. It's actually, I became a much kinder person, honestly, when I left the church because it turned into like, oh, I am actually just making a decision and I want to be a kind person. And it's not out of guilt or fear or anything like that. It's just like, no, it's just a good way to be. Right. So that was a long answer to your short question.
Yeah, my go-to is when I was like, oh, I'm going to troll them. And then ever since they got married, my wife's like, don't do that. They offer them to play video games. They haven't talked to their parents in a while. Let them use your phone. Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I guess I can be a nice guy. So going back to one of the things you mentioned before earlier, the sealing rituals. Have you ever witnessed one of those?
Yeah.
What goes down in that whole thing?
So have you ever looked up like Mormon temple clothes on like the internet?
So I don't want to be disrespectful, but the way I referred to them, it's me coming from the show Under
Big
the Banner
what?
of Heaven.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yep.
I call them like the Chef Boyardee hats.
Chef Boyardee hats for dudes.
Okay.
And you've got green aprons that are, a thing. So effectively, there's a few different ceremonies that you go through in the temple. The sealing is kind of the final one. I think there's one more level, but that's like way above the average member. It's like for the top people, and I know nothing about it. So you go and initially you do like washings and anointing, which is in the Old Testament talked about, that is effectively like blessings pronounced on you, and they use oil in different parts of your body. Once upon a time, like you were under this shield and fully naked under it. That has changed now, so that's not the case. But when I went through the first time, it was. So that was its own thing. Like you're covered, and it's with women, and like women and women, men and men. It's one of the few places in the church where like women actually perform an ordinance. So you do that piece as the first step, and then you go through and there's an endowment, which is what it's called. And you effectively make all these different promises to like basically live the law of consecration, which I find fascinating because Mormons tend to be very Republican, which is not socialist at all, but the law of consecration is 100% socialist. So it's like a really fascinating thing. Anyway, you go through and you do that process, which is its own thing. And like every missionary will go through and do those two things before getting sealed. You don't get sealing is just Mormon marriage effectively, but the thought is it's not just for time, it's for like all eternity. And so there's secret handshakes and you like kneel down at an altar when you're getting married and getting sealed, and you hold your spouse's hand, your soon to be spouse's hand, in one of those handshake positions. And it's very like clinical. Like it's just, you have a sealer, you don't necessarily know them, they don't know you. Sometimes if you happen to know a sealer, it could be more personal, but it tends to be pretty impersonal, and it's super fast. And even if you have a gorgeous like wedding dress, you're still wearing your temple clothes. And so like most dresses don't cover enough for what you need to be wearing in the temple. So lots of times you're like wearing kind of another thing over you that covers it up, along with all the Chef Boyardee hat, the like sash, the green apron, the whole deal. I had a friend who like, she and her husband, one of my roommates in college, they got married in the temple, and neither one of them was super, like intensely, they were both active in the church, which is what you say, but there's like a big difference between levels of activity, even if you're going to church every Sunday, right? And so they were both not super that way. And it like, no one told her in advance. And I knew because I'd already been through the temple going on my mission, but it kind of ruined that day for that, because it was like she had this gorgeous dress and was all ready, and it just made it for a not so great experience. Her husband has since left the church. I think she's just kind of fringy, but anyway, it's a really impersonal ceremony overall. Everyone who is going to be present has to have been through the temple and been endowed and be worthy to be in the temple and have their temple recommend, which has a barcode on it that you scan when you go in the temple. And so it's just such a strange thing for a religion that's like families are eternal. The fact that like no younger people can be there, no one who's not Mormon can be there. It's not my favorite thing. I hope you wanted all the commentary.
No, I love it. And so you mentioned secret handshakes. Is that when like like someone's standing behind a curtain and they just stick their hand through and like shake your hand?
So when you're going through to do the endowment, that actually is legitimately the process, because they're standing, it's supposed to represent the veil between like life and death. And they're standing at the veil to welcome you into what is representative of like the highest kingdom of heaven, which is called the celestial room in a temple. And you can Google and see pictures of all these things, because like the Mormon church, not so much the clothes. I mean, you can find them, but the Mormon church doesn't put those out, I don't think. Maybe garments now. But like you can find pictures of celestial rooms. But yes, but more than anything, it's like there's these different tokens and symbols. And so there's handshakes involved with them that you just need to know. And there's things you recite with them. So, and it all is based on at least the handshake part, very much from like Freemasons, because that also was a thing. So when you look at the history of the religion and all the things involved, you can kind of see where it draws from like different religions that were a thing at the time. It's like getting out of it, things that, because I was born in it, I was raised in it, it was my whole life. My parents had a pretty tumultuous marriage. They got divorced before my mom passed away, but it was stability for me, right? So it provided community and was so beneficial in so many ways. But once you're out of it, you're like, oh, that is like batshit bananas. Like, it's like some weird stuff. And it honestly has taken me years to be okay with anything that feels in any way ritualistic at all, which now I'm like into crystal. Like, I don't, right, it's all made up in my mind, but I still am like, yeah, I'm going to be into crystals and horoscopes and whatever. And I'm just going to take it for what it gives to my life with no real like depth to it. But it took a long time before I was like, anything that feels ritualistic in any way, just, I don't want anything to do with it.
So how does, you mentioned that your parents were divorced. How is that viewed in the church if you go through the whole sealing ceremony? Like, is it like break the seal? Are you not sealed together anymore? Or
it does not break the seal automatically. My parents are still sealed technically. And what's super interesting, I was engaged at one point in time to someone who had been married before while I was still Mormon. They were Mormon. And in order to get sealed, like a man can be sealed to multiple people. The church has to like approve it. Whereas women, you have to get a cancellation of your sealing if you want to be sealed to someone else, which, patriarchy. So a divorce doesn't necessarily cancel a sealing. Like, you actually have to go through the process of canceling a sealing. And of course, like, the rationalization that I had was like, well, God's not going to make you be sealed to someone you don't want to be sealed to. So even if it still stands, like, people will have a choice. You still have agency. I don't believe in any of it now. So
it'd be pretty shitty. Like, you get divorced, and then you die, and you're both in like whatever Mormon heaven is, and you're like, oh fuck, I'm back with this motherfucker.
that would be my parents for sure. Although there were things that happened in their marriage, so maybe if they were both in that headspace, maybe it wouldn't be the case. But interestingly, my dad was engaged to someone after my mom, and she died before they got married of a like super random brain aneurysm, I think, if I remember. I never met her, like, it just whatever. But she was a convert and she'd never been sealed to anyone. So my understanding, the family lore, and I've never really talked to my dad in depth about it, but is that he got permission from the top of the church to get sealed to her so that she would have that saving ordinance. So even though they never got married, she's sealed to him. But the thought again is like, if she doesn't want to be sealed, then she can just decide not to be sealed to him in the afterlife, and it's fine. But that's some weird ass shit, right?
So
even Mormons, I say that too, think that's weird.
So you get proxy people who are not proxy baptized non-Mormons.
Yeah.
But you could also basically force someone to marry you who's already dead, like that you were not
a normal practice normally. And there is proxy sealings. Normally it only happens if people have actually been married in real life. This was just a really strange one-off bizarro thing. But if you believe that you have to have these ordinances to be saved, you can see how, like, you could do that whole math and go, okay, well, it's better to do it. And then they have the choice than to not do it, because if you don't do it, then she's not connected to any man, and you need a man to get you into the highest level of, whatever. So, yeah.
So,
bitter at all.
Speaking of dying and the afterlife, what is, I've heard a lot of things that you get your own planet or whatever. Like, what is Mormon heaven like?
So there's 3 levels plus outer darkness, right? Outer darkness is like you've denied like the worst place you can be. And then there's 3 different levels of heaven. And to get into the highest, you need to be like married. And then the story was, which my understanding is now, if you go look for this, you're not going to find it. And they're kind of shying away from this. But the story was, you like get your own planet. And it's the whole concept, like, as, let's see, I'm trying to remember what the actual words of this are, but basically, like, everyone has the opportunity to basically be a god of their own world and do the creation and the whole thing. I think now they're like getting away from that, is my understanding. The gaslighting that the Mormon church does of its members is like top tier. So, yeah.
So we need to find out who the person was that died and became the creator of Earth, because we
Yeah.
got some beef with this person. I assume it's not a female. I assume females aren't allowed to be creators.
I mean, technically you have to be married, and so there's some level of it. And the church would say the only reason women don't have this power is because they're so respected and they bear children and blah blah blah. But yes, it is men. And honestly, when I think about everything in the world, I'm like, if God exists, he 100% is a dude, because for sure he wouldn't be a woman and letting this shit happen, right?
Yeah,
There's no way.
For sure.
Yeah.
So are there any other weird ceremonies or rituals that you have witnessed or know of?
That pretty much covers it overall. I think the other thing that is so weird to me is like that you have, effectively, they're called bishops, but effectively that's like the pastor, right, of a congregation, who have zero training in anything other than like the religion, right? Being raised in the religion, knowing the religion, who are doing things like counseling marriages, and people are confessing their sins. And right, the church, religions aren't mandated reporters, which I just have huge beef with. And so you have like a church hotline that they're supposed to call if someone comes in and is talking about being like sexually assaulted or whatever. It's go to the church hotline first, and the church hotline takes you to the church's lawyers, right? And so it's like some messy stuff. On top of that, just going and having to confess to, like, here's this guy who just has been made a bishop, and he's not like he's married and he has kids who are also going to church with you, and you're supposed, if you like mess up in whatever way, you go have this conversation. And it totally is like, there's a term that will say, I don't know if Mormons will say it, but ex-Mormons for sure, like you play leadership roulette, where it like totally depends on who your bishop is, what the like restitution is that you have to do. But like, I was 27 when I was engaged. And while I didn't actually have sex at the time, we definitely fooled around. And after I called off my wedding, I was like, I need to go talk to a bishop about this. And I think back on that, and I'm like, I'm sitting there as like a 27-year-old talking about my sex life with some like, he was probably in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. And like, there are friends I have who had sexual things that they did in like high school are like having conversations with middle-aged men about what they're doing sexually. And like, depending on who you're talking to, they'll get super in depth and be like, well, what did you do? Well, was it over the clothes or under the clothes? And it like, it's so gross to me. Like, it's just so gross. But that was so normalized, right? Because it's just what people do. So those would be the other things that I think are really weird. And I think also the church is starting to not get away from that, but like for sure now it's very clear that like you can have a parent in there if you want a parent in there. I mean, from my perspective, if I'm ever talking to any of my nieces or nephews, I'm like, you can have that conversation between you and God. Like, you don't need to go talk to some middle-aged man about this thing. I would feel so much better if even the church would at least allow like you to talk to a woman if you wanted to talk to a woman as a girl. And then there's some really questionable things in the beginning of the church, the history of the church, which, you sent over some questions, one of which is like, would you consider the church a cult? All the all the signs point to it being a cult. If you know cult doc, like, and I know people have real problems with that, but I'm like, yeah, it all charismatic leader, right? Not questioning anything, rituals, clothing, control. But like the history of the church, Joseph Smith was a disgusting human, right? Like, just, I don't know if you've ever looked at it, but like, he married multiple people, and everyone has their rationalizations for why it's okay, including like young girls, like teenage girls. And it's just some messy, gross. I mean, I kind of feel like most cults are sex, like there's some level of sex involved with the cultiness of it. And I think that's 100% true for Mormonism, at least where it started. Like where it is now, it's also super interesting because there was a Netflix special at some point about the fundamentalist LDS church. So there was like a breakoff point after Joseph Smith died. And you had kind of two different directions the church went. And so it's a much smaller organization, but they still practice polygamy. And the special was called, I think, Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey, something like that. And like people were watching it, were like, this is not, Mormons would be like, well, that's not us, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, actually, it may not be us now, but 100% that was us in the early days of the church, right? Like, so it's interesting the mental gymnastics people can do, myself included, right? Like I wasn't immune to it at all.
Yeah, but going back to your whole girls talking to middle-aged men, my wife had actually mentioned that to me. That was one of my questions for you that come up with afterwards, was that I think she was like 14 or something, and she had to go in and talk to this bishop or whoever it was about like if she had any sexual desires and like all these things. I'm like, that is so weird for a middle-aged man to be listening to that. Like, it's disturbing, and why everyone's okay with this is insane.
It's the normalization of crazy, right? I mean, asking things like asking about your masturbation practices, if you masturbate, because you can't masturbate, worst thing in the world, right? And it's interesting, like just the process of undoing a lot of that. And like I've been through a lot of therapy. When I was leaving the church, I found a really great ex-Mormon therapist, which is amazing. And then I transitioned to doing like trauma therapy, not just for Mormonism. I had traumatic childhood stuff, but like really having to process that, because the like little bits of shame can really creep in. And like even 10 years out, there are still moments. I'll be partaking in a little garden gummy and have moments where I'm like, I'm okay. Like, this is okay. No one's judging me. I don't believe in hell, so I'm not going there, but yeah.
Growing up, did you ever? I don't recall the name of it. I think it's like a track or like a pilgrimage or something where you
Track.
go. Yeah. So my wife went on that. Did you go on one of those? No.
It was not a thing. So just for context, like I'm 47. So it was not really a thing that was done when I was younger. I went to like girls camp, so Mormon like camp, but it was just normal-ish camp. Normal-ish, I say, because even now, like you'll have certain camp and everyone makes their own rules for their own organization, whatever. But like where girls have to wear t-shirts over their swimsuits because there's the men who are there, which I'm like, talk about normalizing, sexualizing girls' bodies, right? Like it's so gross.
Yeah. Yeah. But I was gonna say so with track, my wife I went on that like I think twice or once, and her brother recalls he told me the story where they had like 3 or 4 kids had heat stroke. You walk like what 10, 12 miles something like that in like a few days or whatever, and you have to wear like the clothes from back in the day, and you're carrying heavy stuff with you like the wagon or whatever. And like one of the kids who had heat stroke, they had to take him to the hospital, but the church spun it in their actual like on Sunday to the whole church that like, oh no, he got up, like he was fine, like God saved him. And her brother was like, that didn't happen. Like I was right there. He went to the hospital.
There's actually like stories that church leaders will say over, like so there's a big conference twice a year called General Conference where like you don't have church, everyone watches this broadcast. It's like 10 hours, like 2 hour chunks, but over, 2 or 3 days. And even then, like some of the stories have totally been disproven. Like they're lying to the whole church about some story because the story illustrates what they want it to illustrate. Right. And like stories of missionaries being told to not tell their families how hard it is, which I'm like, I'm sorry, anything that tells you to keep things from your parents, not okay. Like, none of that is okay. Yeah.
No. Mormons also, like, I feel like the church, it's so new. It's so crazy that people believed that he, like, stuck his head in a hat and read these stones. Like, no, you're not allowed to see them. Because, right, it was the stories that you couldn't see them because if you did see them, they would, like, just get destroyed or whatever.
I'm not totally sure with that, but it was really interesting. There were like 116 pages that had been translated. Um, and there was one of the guys who was helping Joseph Smith with this translation, which I think he was just writing. Really wanted to show them to his wife, etc. She ended up not giving them back, or they disappeared somehow, or got lost. And like he wouldn't retranslate them because the story was that like she was going to go translate that, or she was going to change it, like whatever. Right. But I'm like, no. And all the history, like all the archaeological stuff that's real, no evidence of any, right? No evidence of any of this. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I can on one hand understand like Christians because the 2,000 years ago is a long
Yeah.
time, but like 150, 160, 200 years ago, like it's relatively like new. Like you would think that they wouldn't believe this nonsense, but they've done an excellent job of like growing to this huge ass cult status and like making trillions, I'm sure, each year.
They have so much money. It's like enraging. It makes me so angry. And missionaries still have to pay for their own missions. Like the church doesn't pay for you to go on a mission, right? Missionaries are paying for it. When I was younger, the church would pay people to like clean the church, and it was often members who needed jobs. And so it was great. Like that to me, I'm like, that makes perfect sense. Like you pay people to pay the church, pay tithing. Now it's all volunteer members. They're not paying people. And I don't know if you've been in a Mormon church recently at all with your wife's family, but like I, they always smell bad to me. Like it always has a little bit of like a dirty diaper kind of under, like, because the members are cleaning it voluntarily. There's no like rules around it. It's wild. Meanwhile, they're sitting on 200 some odd plus billion that they've hidden. I mean, now it's been discovered, but right, like the SEC went after them. And yeah, the rage I feel about the amount of money I've paid in tithing. Granted, I did get my education at BYU, which is heavily subsidized by the church. So like I got some of it back in that sense, but I feel a lot of rage about a lot of things.
Yeah.
That's fair.
And like we have out here we have the Deseret Industries thrift stores, and
Yeah.
I hate shopping there, but at the same time everything is so clean. I'm like, it's either that or the Goodwill. I'm like, you know what, I guess I have to do like $10 here and there. Like I shouldn't, but I mean
It is what it is. And in general, like Mormons, especially if you're not Mormon, Mormons are such nice people in general. Like there's some scammy stuff like MLMs and how, whatever. But in general, like really nice, decent humans, good community members overall. If you're Mormon and like not a good enough Mormon, sometimes that can feel not so true. But if you're not Mormon, Mormons are the best.
we when we moved out here, we had her family had the church come help us like pack the truck, and one of the guys like fell through the wall coming down the stairs, like put a huge hole in the wall. The next day he came back, patched it up right away, first thing in the morning. I'm like, you know what? I will say Mormons at least will like the people in general are nice, you know.
Yeah. And there's some good things that come from, I have my own business with a business partner, and we've talked frequently. Like there's some things that you start speaking in front of people when you're like 3 years old, right? Like, even if it's just getting up to read a scripture in front of all the kids, you're still doing it. And like, there are skills that have really helped me in my life. And I avoided a lot of like vicey type things when it probably would not have been great for me, because it would have been a coping mechanism as far as like drugs or alcohol or whatever. So there are some good things about it, but I think that's true for a lot of like cults, and there's a reason people join them, right? Like community, how it feels to be part of that, an overall purpose, right? It was actually a big struggle initially for me when I was leaving to go, okay, but what am I going to? Because if this isn't true, like what is? And I finally just got to a point that I just said, oh, I don't actually care. Like, it doesn't matter. And even now, I would say I'm probably like, I would call myself an atheist, agnostic atheist, somewhere in there. And I also just don't care, because I'm like, it doesn't matter. If there is an afterlife, I'm living my life in such a way that I'm a decent human. And so, and if God is such a dick that like you have to have worshiped him and done all these ordinances and followed all these rules and been obedient, well, okay, then I can go dwell in hell. Like, fine. Yeah.
Well, that's where we're going, so it'll be a big party down there.
Yeah.
Right.
One of the things you kind of touched on earlier is the women and their treatment in the church and whatnot.
Yeah.
I vaguely understand that the church forbade black people from holding the priesthood until like what, the 70s. How does
1978. Yeah.
how does the church rectify like that being okay?
It was the times. The church is perfect, the prophets are still human. Like, there's a lot of just dancing and stories. And sometimes I've heard like, well, if the church had let black people in at that point in time or beforehand, then no one would have joined the church because it would have been so radical at that point in history, blah, blah. But it still is very much like, I mean, I was taught as a kid that like it was the mark of Cain to be like black, right? Like it's historically, like I was born. I mean, you want to talk about some shit. Somehow I got the messaging, and I'm sure someone listening to this who's like super Mormon would be like, that's not true. I'm just going to say the messaging I got as a kid, and it's true for me, was basically that because I'd been born into like a Mormon family, and I was, I'm trying to think, maybe I didn't get the messaging I was white. I might be projecting that because I just get enraged sometimes. And my grandparents were super racist, one set of them. But like, because of this, it meant that I was super righteous in the, like, that we believe there was a pre-mortal life, right? And so I was super good. And that's why I got born into such great circumstances, which is really problematic in so many ways. But I think that's how, like, the justification is more like, well, it just wasn't the right time for blacks to have the priesthood yet. And then it was, right? And then it was fine.
A lot of spinning the narrative, gaslighting, and making it work.
Yeah. And never apologizing, never admitting any wrongdoing on any level. It was like, well, God has now said that this is an okay thing. And there's been changes to like, there's been changes to how the temple ordinances are done. So if you watch Under the Banner of Heaven, you saw like the old school where it's like, you're literally promising to like cut your throat if you break your covenants. That's not done anymore. That's changed. It used to be if you didn't get married in the temple, when you got married, you had to wait a year to do it. And now it's so like they had to change that because in Europe, you had to get married civilly, at least in some countries. And so they made it was like, okay, well, in Europe, you can do it and you can just go within the next week. Well, now you can get married civilly and then go get married in the temple, which I think about how many people couldn't do that, and like family members couldn't be at their weddings. Like, imagine, yeah, so many things have changed over time. And it's always like, well, it's revelation. Well, okay, I guess. Yeah.
So you said that there is a before, like, time before we were on Earth, like a
Yeah.
lifetime before that. What is that? Like, is it you live a whole life, or is it like a short?
It's interesting. It's like this premortal life. They used to call it pre-existence, but it's like you exist, but you like exist as spirits. And there's somewhere in the Doctrine, I want to say maybe it's in the Doctrine and Covenants, which is that book of scripture that's like modern revelation, that talks about the hosts of heaven, like all these spirits, and a third of them followed Satan and his plan, and then 2/3 didn't. I might be getting that reversed. And so if you made it to earth, it already means that you're better. And then there are so many, now that I'm into it, I'm like, yeah. So the story being that there's like a third of these spirits out there, of anyone who's ever existed on earth, are like floating out there trying to tempt you and like not happy, and they've chosen Satan and whatever else. And yeah.
Well, that explains why we're so freaking tired all the time.
Right? Yeah. Under attack constantly.
Under attack. So one of the last things I'm going to ask you about, and you talked about this briefly earlier, coffee. So why can't Mormons drink coffee? And like, why was caffeine the exception to the rule at some point?
So there's in the Doctrine and Covenants, there's a revelation called the Word of Wisdom, which basically says, and it's fascinating because it prohibits hot drinks. And behind it is basically like Joseph Smith's wife was tired of like cleaning up after all these people like smoking and spitting, chewing tobacco and all these things. And so then it became this revelation. But it technically says hot drinks. And then because we have prophets, or the Mormon church, I say we, like it's culturally right who I am. But prophets, then there's revelation about what that means and what it doesn't mean. And it's fascinating because for a long time, it was like caffeine in general. My family was always a Diet Coke drinking family. It was never a thing. We always had it. And that wouldn't like keep you from going to the temple. But for whatever reason, people just glommed onto coffee, which don't worry, my brother, who's still pretty active, drinks like Monster energy drinks, and those are okay. So basically I'm saying, I don't know why. I don't know. It just is. And you just follow the rules. And that's how it goes.
Yeah. I heard it was like, it's a stimulant.
Yeah.
So it's like a drug.
But then they've changed it. And it's interesting. And I have not verified this, but I was talking to someone the other day who was basically just said, yeah. And when Ensign Peak, which is the church's investment company, basically internal company, and tax exempt status, like don't get me started on all these things, but basically they have a huge investment in Coca-Cola, and like that seemed to coincide with when then it was okay to drink caffeinated sodas. I don't know that that's true or not, but it just is. Yeah, it's an interesting. So I don't know behind it. But also in that same Word of Wisdom is like eat meat sparingly, and a number of other things that no one pays attention to, right? Like, so it's interesting.
I heard somebody say that the caffeine thing is still a thing, but there's a lot of people that don't realize there's caffeine in a lot of things. So like somebody went to get a Baja Blast and then they were like, there's caffeine in that?
And I think for the most part, it's less like soda is less of a thing. It's still very much coffee, but also kind of the younger generation of Mormons, especially like Gen Z, are just kind of like, I'm going to do what I want to do. So, which sometimes I get a little angry about because I'm like, I wish I had been that person, but I wasn't.
I've heard that the church's membership is declining, right? It's like going down with the future generations?
That is my understanding. I think technically the membership numbers aren't necessarily fully going down as far as reporting, but they've changed how they report things so that it doesn't look as bad as it is. And you still have a lot of members being born into the church, so that counts. And you have a lot of people who've left, like myself, who don't take their name off the records, right? And so who knows what the real numbers are, and there's lots of reasons people don't take their names off the records, and it's a whole process. Like you have to get an attorney involved sometimes. Like there's a whole process to go through.
So the last thing I'm going to ask you about, this is, again, you touched on this earlier, the magic underwear, the garments. What are those, like, you get to wear that on top of your regular underwear, or is it a
So
substitute?
generally speaking, you wear it in place of, for at least for bottoms. Tops, women, I always wore my bra over it. Some people do under, but there's like symbols in them. And so if you're not wearing a bra over it, like the symbols will kind of show through a little bit. Just there, it's white, but it just is raised a little bit. And so that's its own thing. But yes. So when you go through the temple, that's when you get your magic underwear, your garments. Um, and you're supposed to wear them. It's interesting because, like, you're told to wear them all the time. And then it's kind of up for personal. So, like, I never wore them working out and obviously swimming. But I had a friend from my freshman year in college who got married like the summer of our freshman year. So, met her husband and married him within like 2 months before she even started school. And so we were talking later, and basically, like, garments came off for sex and then went right back on right away. Right. And so people have all these different ways and interpretations of wearing them, but the promise you make is that you'll wear them all the time, basically. And they're supposed to protect you and be a reminder. But even that is a demonstration of like how the church changes over time to be like more mainstream. At the end of the day, I view Mormonism now as just like a big corporation to make it just is about money. Um, and yes, good community and whatever, but that's where I see like they change things because they know they're losing members. So even recently, like when my parents went through the temple, these garments were one piece. Like it was a onesie with like holes in it so you could go to the bathroom. By the time I went through the temple, there were two pieces. But they, like, for women, they used to go over your shoulders, so you couldn't wear tank tops. So like you'll hear ex-Mormons talk about porn shoulders, and that's why. And for whatever reason, it's totally okay for like a dude's garment collar to show above their shirt or for their shorts to kind of hang out under their shorts, like the whereas for women, like you make sure your garments aren't showing. But they've just changed it again. So like there's a tank toppy type top for women. So now like I've seen Mormon influencers who are still Mormon who are like, I'm going to church for the first time with like a sleeveless dress. And it's like, okay, so are you supposed to be? Because I was taught it was about modesty and like a number of things, right? Not just modesty, but modesty, clothing modesty, safety, which modesty is its whole other topic. Because if you think about living modestly and then you look at all the McMansions in Utah or in Arizona by the temple, these, 10 and 20,000 square foot houses, that's not modest in any way, shape, or form. But clothing modesty, they now have tank top ones. And I felt a little ragey initially because I was like, are you kidding me? And the bottoms have gotten shorter. And I have great legs that I wasted for years. I could have been wearing much shorter skirts. So, but it was a whole process. And even after I left the church and like we recorded a podcast episode about what do you do with garments now that you've left? Like I held on to mine for a while. And then finally I was done one day and you're supposed to dispose of them in a very particular way. Like make sure you cut the symbols out and like you can burn them or you can cut them up into little pieces. There's a whole, right? It's not a cult at all. I threw mine down the trash chute in my apartment building and it was like super cathartic.
Do they give you just one pair, or do you
No, you have to buy them. Don't worry. You can buy as many as you want. You have to buy them. I'm sure the profit margin is like next to nothing, but at the same time, right? Again, it's a business.
Jeez.
Oh my god.
Yeah. Uh-huh. But there's stories about like I was wearing my garments and I got in a car accident and like I had a slash in my leg, but it stopped where my garments were and I was fine. Like the lore is amazing. Right.
So you're telling me that God will spare you if you're wearing it, but God forbid you forget it or it doesn't go long enough, that body part's screwed.
Yep.
Shit.
Right?
Not a cult.
Not a cult.
Well, yeah. Chloe, we appreciate you being on the show, and we loved having you. tell the good people between state lines where they can find you on social media.
Social media, it is Chloe Anderson with 2 underscores after it, and it's Anderson with an EN at the end on Instagram and on TikTok. I don't post a ton, and I am an executive coach and culture consultant, so very different than this conversation, but that's where you can find me on the socials. Yeah.
Well,
or if anyone is more ex-Mormon and needs some support, Wordless podcast is great. And we don't record anymore, but we've got about 50 episodes and they are super helpful, we've been told, for navigating life post-Mormonism.
there you go. Thank you, Chloe. We appreciate having you.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
That was awesome. I just went and followed her. I feel like that podcast would be helpful, even just like the reintegration with life and how do you make friends. Like, I'm like, as somebody who was in a 15-year relationship before the last 2 years, I could use that.
Right? Like, how do you get yours socially acquainted again with the world and like reintegrate it? Because that's a lot. Like, woo.
Burn sage now. That's what I feel like. Well, somebody told me that actually they were like, have you burned sage around your house? You should do it. You're waking up at odd hours.
You are waking up odd hours. It varies. I'll like wake up and see a reel come through at like 2 in the morning my time, or like 3 in the morning my time. Like, man, Steph had a rough night, I guess.
Yeah, it happens. It happens. Burn some sage. I have a sage candle going to.
We need to get a Jehovah's Witness on the podcast. So, guys, if you're a Jehovah's Witness or ex-Jehovah, if you're Jehovah, you're not listening to this. But if you're an ex-Jehovah, please, message me or Stephanie or the podcast, because I really want to talk about Jehovah's Witnesses.
I would message Holden or the podcast.
Stephanie doesn't check her DMs.
I do, but I just get a lot of people saying, I connect with you and want to do a reading, or have you ever been a sugar baby? And I get those all the time.
I want to be a sugar baby.
I love your profile picture. Can I use it for some piece of art? But I need to pay you money. It's a requirement.
But yes, guys, message me if you're ex-Jehovah, because I once had when I worked at a warehouse, I managed a warehouse like 7 years ago, and I hired this Jehovah's Witness, and I didn't know obviously she was a Jehovah going into it, but she like after she was hired, she like nonstop talked about her faith or whatever, but like she couldn't celebrate birthdays and couldn't celebrate Christmas, and I tried to like change our Christmas party or the holiday party to like a winter party, and she was like, no, it's still in the same time, so I'm pretty sure it's secretly a holiday party. I'm like, man. And she also got mad. Have you played this game called Secret Hitler?
No.
So it's this game where essentially it's like kind of like an investigation game, but the point is to kill Hitler, and you have like I think 5 people you play with, and 4 of them are not Hitler, and 1 of them is Hitler, and you each don't know who you are, like except for like the Hitler person knows who everyone else is, right? But the people who are not Hitler don't know who Hitler is, so you gotta like deduct who Hitler is, and then you vote to kill him off every round. And if you're right, you win. If you're wrong, obviously you keep going. So the whole point of the game is to kill Hitler. I tried to play that game.
A game like that, we just didn't know it was a Hitler game.
Yeah, I think it's was started as Secret Hitler, and I think they have like different variations now. And
yeah, we played it at work.
At work.
when I worked for a Mormon man, and honestly, when she's talking about the leadership roulette, I'm like, wow, that resonates with me.
Yeah, that but so you've played a variation of it. Well, so I tried to play this game, but I called it like Secret Vader, so like Darth Vader, uh, to make it more like, obviously non-controversial. And she got offended because Hitler killed Jehovah's Witnesses in the Holocaust. And I was like, we're not playing Secret Hitler. And she's like, yeah, but that's like one of the variations you can play. I was like, okay, you can go home. That's fine. I
Yeah,
can't do
you can turn anything into this. Get out of here.
Get out of here. Get out of here. Yeah, so guys, if you live in the world, don't drink coffee, otherwise you're going to hell. With us, we are doomed to hell, according to the Mormons. Don't forget your secret magic underwear, and we will talk to you guys next week.
Bye.